हे गाइस, दिस इज़ सनी एंड स्वागत है आपका एपिसोड 2 ऑफ प्योर टॉक। तो आज मैंने सोचा कुछ अलग सा करते हैं। सो इट्स अ शॉर्ट स्टोरी रिटन बाय विलियम डीन हॉवेल्स एंड वो शेयर करने का मैंने सोचा है। तो होपफुली आपको अच्छी लगे, आप लाइक करो, शेयर करो, सब्सक्राइब करो। सो हियर इट गोज़। Little girl came into her papa's study, as she always did on Saturday morning before breakfast, and asked for a story. He tried to beg off that morning, for he was very busy, but she would not let him, so he began. Well, once there was a little pig. She put her hand over his mouth and stopped him at the word. She said she had heard these little pig stories till she was perfectly sick of them. Well, what kind of story shall I tell then? About Christmas? It's getting to be Christmas season soon. It's past Thanksgiving already. It seems to me, her papa argued, that I have told as often about Christmas as I have about little pigs. No difference. Christmas is more interesting. Well, her papa roused from his writing by a great effort. Well then, I'll tell you about the story that a little girl wanted Christmas every day of the year. How would you like that? First rate, the girl replied with enthusiasm, and she nestled into comfortable shape in his lap, ready for listening. Well then there's a little pig. Oh, what are you pounding me for? Because you said pig instead of little girl. I should like to know what's the difference between a pig and a little girl who wanted Christmas every day of the year. Papa, said the little girl warningly, if you don't go on, I'll give it to you. And at that point her papa darted off like lightning and began to tell the story as fast as he could. Well, once there was a little girl who liked Christmas so much that she wanted to be Christmas every day in the year. As soon as Thanksgiving was over, she began to send postal cards to the Christmas fairy and asked if she might have it or not. But the old fairy never replied, never answered to any of the postals. And after the while, little girl found out that the fairy was pretty particular about the notice and everything and anything but letters, not even correspondence cards in envelopes, but the real letters on sheets of paper and sealed out within a monogram or your initial of your name anyway. So then the story began. She began to send her letters, and in about 2 to 3 weeks or just the day before Christmas she got a letter from the fairy. She said she might have it Christmas every day for a year, and then they would see about having it longer. The little girl was good deal excited already, preparing for the old-fashioned once a year Christmas that was coming the next day, and perhaps the fairy's promises didn't make such an impression on her as it would have made on some other time. She just resolved to keep it to herself and surprise everybody as it is kept coming, and it slipped out of her mind altogether. She had a splendid Christmas, and she went to bed early so as to let Santa Claus to have a chance at the stockings, and in the morning she went up the first of anybody and went and filled them all and found hers all lumpy, the stockings obviously, and she found her stockings all lumpy with the packages and the candy and the oranges and the grapes and the pocketbooks and rubber balls and all kinds of small presents, and her big brothers was nothing but tongs in them, and her young lady sisters with a new silk umbrella, and her papas and mamas with potatoes and pieces of coal wrapped in tissue paper, just as they always had every year. Then she waited around till the rest of the family went up, and where she was the first to burst into the library. And when the doors were opened and looked at the large present laid out on the library table, books and portfolios and boxes of stationery and breastpins and towels and the little stoves and the dozen of napkins and inkstands and skates and snow shovels and photo frames and little easels and the box of watercolors and Turkish paste and nougat and candied cherries and doll houses and waterproofs and the big Christmas tree lighted and standing in a waste basket in the middle. She had a splendid Christmas all day. She ate so much candy that she did not want any breakfast. The whole forenoon, the presents kept pouring in that expressman had no time, had to deliver the night before, and she went round giving the presents she had got for other people, and come home and ate turkey and cranberry for dinner, and plum pudding, and nuts and raisins and oranges and candy, and then went out and coasted and came in with a stomachache, crying, and her papa said she would see if his house was turned into a sort of fool's paradise another year. And they had a light supper, and pretty early everybody went to bed cross. The little girl pounded on her father's back again, and well, what now? Did I say pigs? You made them act like pigs. Well, didn't they? No matter, you thought to put it into a story. Very well then, I'll take it all out. Her father went down. The little girl slept very heavily and she slept very late. But she was weakened at last by the other children dancing round her bed with her stockings full of presents in their hands. What is it? Said the little girl, and she rubbed her eyes and tried to rise up in the bed. Christmas, Christmas, Christmas. They all shouted and waved their stockings. Nonsense. It was Christmas yesterday. Brothers and sisters just laughed. We don't know about that. It's Christmas today anyway. You come into the library and see. Then all at once it flashed on the little girl that the fairy was keeping her promise and her year of Christmases was beginning. She was dreadfully sleepy, but she sprang up like a lark that has overeaten itself and gone to bed cross, and darted into the library. There it was again, books and portfolios and boxes of stationery and breastpin. You needn't go over it all, Papa. I guess I can't remember just what was there, said the little girl. Well, and there was the Christmas tree blazing away and the family picking out their presents, but looking pretty sleepy, and her father perfectly puzzled and her mother ready to cry. I'm sure I don't see how I am to dispose of all these things, said her mother, and her father said it seems to him they had had something just like it in the day before, but he supposed he must have dreamt it. This struck the little girl as the best kind of a joke, and so she ate so much candy she didn't want any breakfast and went around carrying presents and had turkey and cranberry for dinner, and then went out and coasted and came in with a Papa. Well, what now? What did you promise, you forgetful thing? Oh yes. Well, the next day it was just the same thing all over again, but everybody getting crosser, and at the end of the week's time, so many people had lost their tempers that you could pick up lost tempers anywhere. They perfectly stewed the ground. Even when the people tried to recover their tempers, they usually got somebody else and made it to the most dreadful mix. The little girl began to get frightened, and keeping the secret all to herself. She wanted to tell her mother, but she didn't dare to, and she was ashamed to ask the fairy to take back her gift. So it went on, and it was Christmas on St. Valentine's Day and Washington's birthday, just as the same day as any day, and it didn't skip even the 1st of April, though everything was counterfeit that day, and that was some relief. After a while, coal and potatoes began to be awfully scarce. So many people have been wrapped up tissue paper to fool papas and mamas with. Turkeys to be about $1,000 apiece. Papa, well what? You are beginning to fib. Well, 2000 then. And they got to passing off almost anything for turkeys. Half-grown humid birds and even rocks out of the Arabian Nights, and the real turkeys were so scarce. And cranberries, well, they asked a diamond apiece for cranberries. All the wood and the orchards were cut down for Christmas tree, and where the woods and the orchids used to be, it looked like a stubble field with stumps. After a while, they had to make Christmas trees. They had to make Christmas trees out of rags and stuff them with barn, like old-fashioned dolls. But there were plenty of rags because people got so poor buying presents for one another they couldn't get any new clothes, and they just wore their old ones to tatters. They got so poor that everybody had to go to the poorhouse except the confectioners and the fancy stores keepers and the booksellers and the expressmen, and they all got so rich and proud that they would hardly wait upon a person when he came to buy. It was perfectly shameful. Well, after it had gone on about 3 or 4 months, the little girl, whenever she came into the room in the morning and saw those great ugly lumpy stockings dangling at the fireplace and the disgusting presents around everywhere, used to sit down and burst out crying. In 6 months, she was perfectly exhausted. She couldn't even cry anymore. She just lay on the lounge and rolled her eyes and panted. About the beginning of October, she took to sitting down on dolls whenever she found them. French dolls or any kind, she hated the sight of them, so by the Thanksgiving, she was crazy and slammed her present across the room. By that time, people didn't carry presents around so nicely anymore. They flung them over the fence or through the window or anything, and instead of running their tongues out and taking great pains to write for dear Papa, Mama, or brother or sister or Susie, Sammy, Billy, Bobby, Jimmy, Jenny, or whoever it was, and troubling to get the spelling right, and the singing the names and Xmas 18, they used to write in the gifts book, "Take it out, you horrid old thing," and then go out and bang it against the front door. Nearly everybody had barns to hold their presents, but pretty soon the barns overflowed and they had to use them to let them lie out in the rain or anywhere. Sometimes the police used to come and tell them to shovel their presents off the sidewalk or they would arrest them. "I thought you said everybody had gone to the poorhouse," interrupted the little girl. "They did go at first," said her papa, "but after a while the poorhouses got so filled they had to send the people back to their own houses. They tried to cry when they got back but couldn't make the least sound." "Why couldn't they?" asked the little girl. "Because they had lost their voices saying Merry Christmas so much. Did I tell you how it was on 4th of July? No, how it was?" And the little girl nestled closer in expectation of something uncommon. Well, the night before, the boys stayed up to celebrate, as they always do, and fell asleep before 12 o'clock as usual, expecting to be wakened by the bells and cannons. But it was nearly 8 o'clock before the first boy in the United States woke up, and then he found out what the trouble was. As soon as he get his clothes on and ran out of the house and smashed a big cannon torpedo down the pavement, but it didn't make any more noise than a damned wad of paper. And after he tried about 20 or 30 more, he began to pick them up and look at them. Every single torpedo was a big raisin. They then he just taked it up the upst- then he just taked it upstairs and examined his firecrackers and toy pistols and $2 collection of fireworks and found out they were nothing but sugar up candy painted up to look like fireworks. Before 10 o'clock, every boy in the United States found out that his 4th of July things had turned into a Christmas things, and then they just sat down and cried. They were so mad. There were about 20 million boys in the United States, and so you can imagine what a noise they made. Some men got together before night with a little powder that hadn't turned into purple sugar yet, and they said they would fire off one cannon anyway. But the cannon burst into thousands of pieces, for it was nothing but rock candy. And some of the men nearly got killed. The 4th of July orations all turned into Christmas carols, and when anybody tried to read declaration instead of saying when in the course of human events it became necessary, he was sure to sing God rest you merry gentlemen. It was perfectly awful. The little girl drew a sigh of satisfaction. And how was it at Thanksgiving? Her papa hesitated. Well, I'm almost afraid to tell you. I'm afraid you'll think it's wicked. Well, tell anyway, said the little girl. Well, before it came Thanksgiving, it had leaked out who has caused all the Christmases. The girl had suffered so much that she had talked about her in her sleep, and after hardly anybody would play with her. People just perfectly despised her, because if it had not been her greediness, it wouldn't have happened. And now, when it came Thanksgiving, and she wanted them to go to the church and have a squash pie and turkey and show the gratitude, they said that all the turkeys have been eaten up for her old Christmas dinners, and if she would stop the Christmases, they would just see about the gratitude. Wasn't it dreadful? And the very next day, the little girl began to send letters to the Christmas fairy and then 10 telegrams to stop it. But it didn't do any good, and she got to call the fairy house. But the girl that came to the door always said, not at home, or engaged, or at dinner, or something like that. And so it went on till it came to the old once a year Christmas Eve. The little girl fell asleep, and when she woke up in the morning, she found out it was nothing but a dream. Suggested the little girl. No, indeed, her papa said it was everything but true. Well, what did she find out then? Why, that it wasn't Christmas at last and wasn't ever going to be anymore. Now it's time for breakfast. The little girl held her papa fast around the neck. You shan't go if you are going to leave it. So, how do you want it left? Christmas once a year. All right, said her papa, and he went on again. Well, there was the greatest rejoicing all over the country, and it extended to clear up into Canada. The people met together everywhere and kissed and cried for joy. The city carts went around and gathered up all the candies and raisins and nuts and dumped them into the river. And it made the fish perfectly sick. The whole United States, as far as Alaska, was in one blaze of bonfire, where the children were burning up their gift books and presents of all kinds. They had the greatest time. The little girl went to thank the old fairy because she had stopped it being Christmas, and she said she hoped she would keep her promise and see Christmas never come again. Then the fairy frowned and asked her if she was sure she knew what she meant. The little girl asked her why not. Kind of good story. She asked her why not, and the fairy said, that now she was behaving just as greedily as ever and she'd better look out. That made the little girl think it all over carefully again, and she said she would be willing to have Christmas about once in 1,000 years, and then she said 100, and then she said 10, and at last she got down to 1. Then the fairy said that was the good old way that has pleased people over since Christmas began, and she was agreed. Then the little girl said, "What are your shoes made of?" And the fairy said, "Leather." And the little girl said, "Bargains done forever," and skipped off and hippity hop the whole way home. She was so glad. "How will that do?" asked Papa. "First rate," said the little girl, but she hated to have to stop the story and was rather sober. However, her mama put her head in the door and asked her papa, "Are you not coming to breakfast? What have you been telling that child?" "Oh, just a moral tale." The little girl caught him around the neck. "We know." "Don't you tell what, Papa? Don't you tell what?" So here we finish the little story. So meet you in the next episode. Till then, bye bye, take care, and sayonara.